My name's Gill and I look after learner welfare on behalf of the apprentice programme for Babcock and more recently within the world of automotive. So those of you joining us today from that part of the world may already be familiar with me. A big welcome to you all. Mental health and wellbeing is a huge priority on my agenda for young people, and I'm working to support the education of our partners, some of whom Matt has already talked about, and what we can do to better support those of you already on programme and those of you who are thinking about joining. What I hope to be able to do today is to talk about essentially what wellbeing is, how that does link to our mental health, and what you can do about it for yourself. Sometimes when we have contact with learners, it can be really outstanding to see how little self-care is in place by that individual experiencing the challenge. So if I can encourage one or two of you to think about a little more what you can do for yourself as a result of today, then that would be fabulous. I must just tell you that the virtual world and I aren't the best of friends. So, you might see me being a bit useless, as I've already mentioned, flitting between two screens. Please bear with me. And if you've got any questions or thoughts, as Gabriella indicated, there is going to be a Q&A at the end. I'm really welcome all of your thoughts and questions if you have any that you want to share. Lastly, my PowerPoint, I should just say, might not be all singing and dancing, but in supporting learners with additional learning challenges, we know that less is more, so don't critique me too harshly there. Let's see if I can get this to work. Yay, first slide success. So if I was to consider what well-being is, we understand that it's the absence of ill health. It's the way we feel that's linked to other areas of our life, which essentially leads to our overall happiness. In its simplest format, if I'm not ill, then I must be well, therefore my well-being is where it needs to be. Number two considers a little more in much broader terms and includes our relationships, our finances, our position or contribution in our community or society, maybe where we work, our physical state and sense of purpose, and what we surround ourselves by or who. And I just really wanted to throw in there the definition of welfare because it's one of the same thing. So don't be alarmed, I guess, if you hear us use the term welfare with you. Some people can kind of be alarmed by that particular term, but actually in essence this is what it is. It's about your physical and mental health and happiness, particularly defined as being that linked to a particular person. If we look at this next slide, you can see that in all of these areas in life, this is going to contribute to our overall feeling of well-being. It's never as a result of one single thing. We can absolutely have that aspect that gives us that buzz on that day or any given time, but the health of our mind can impact massively with the way in which we choose to and manage how we lead our life. Your well-being is fundamental to what you will do in life. And I think it's important to recognise that whilst these are intrinsically linked to your mental health, your capacity to keep well and to function is highly unlikely will be that we're going to be winning at any one of, or all of these at any one time. And I guess this is whilst we look for the idea of life satisfaction, and that it comes from these factors, it's got to be with the understanding that this is about balance and excuse me, and that it's under control. You can achieve a perfectly lovely equilibrium of really good balance, even if these things are not all in one place at any one time. So the link to our mental health. When we talk about mental health these days, we can tend to focus on it in a negative way. It's the buzzword, isn't it? We hear it everywhere, every given term, whether it's on Insta, Facebook, Snapchat, wherever else it is, what other platforms you're using, we're hearing about it more and more. And that's right, it's rightfully so that that's the case. But how often do we hear people talking positively about their mental health in a good light? Hi, Hazza, how you doing? Oh yeah, brilliant, mate. Having a ball, life's amazing. Had some funny stuff happen in the last few months, doing wonders for my mental health. We just don't talk about it like that, do we? And you're probably thinking I sound completely ridiculous just mentioning it about it in that way. Who does that? We do very quickly, however, associate our experiences to the poor or challenging mental health times that we're having. And if we actually look at the WHO definition of mental health, we can see that the very rationale is being described is what I've just said. Mental health is about a state of mind, and it's about our capacity to manage what it is that's going on around us in spite of when it's challenging. It includes our ability to contribute for ourselves and for others. And there's our link. It's in essence one of the same thing. If we take care of our mental health, the likelihood is that our well-being will be okay. If our well-being is compromised, it's likely that our overall mental health will be too. So what's the current state of affairs? This is the bit that, maybe isn't so good. 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health problem of some kind each year. And I will tell you, things like the word problem, if you work with me, if you have to engage with me at any point, I don't like the words problem, issue, struggling. They're just not words I like to try and use, because for me they've always got this negative tinge on them. 1 in 4 people are going to experience some sort of mental health challenge at some point, and that's it, isn't it? It's a challenge, isn't it? It's something that we are faced with, that we have to manage, that we have to deal with. But if we apply negative terminology to it, it can make really the responses that we get about it be quite negative too. 1 in 6 people report experiencing a common health problem like anxiety and depression in any given week. So for those of you that might have had that, or are in it, or have experienced bouts of it, you're not alone. 1 in 6 people reporting something. And I'm going to go back to that in a second, if I can get my slide to work. The estimated cost of mental health problems in the UK is over 100 billion each year. What I could do with 100 billion quid. And I know that as apprentices, you'd be wondering the same thing. A lot of you come and talk to me about your finances and the impact of that. In the most part, that is costing employers, because it happens through absences, but also there is the cost associated to treatments for people that are experiencing a mental health challenge. But if I can go back to point 2, anxiety and depression are the most common conditions in the world. And here we are still debating its legitimacy, its the reality, its power, its effect. I once attended a TED talk by a lady called Natasha Devon. She's a bit of a mental health guru and advocate. She used to advise for government. And she has a theory about this, which I think is spot on. And I think I want to share that with you now. It boils down to the English language. It's to do with the overuse of the word anxiety or anxious, or even the word depressed. I don't know, let me give you an example. But how often do we talk about the weather? And how often do you hear people saying, oh, this weather, so depressing, raining again? It's rubbish. It's rubbish. It's raining. It might make me feel a bit miserable at that time, in that moment. It might stop me from what I want to do. But is it depressing? Probably not. Another example, I'm bored, there's nothing to do. How depressing is that? We are associating that key word that is a condition to feelings and emotions that actually not necessarily linked to it directly. Give you another example in terms of anxiety, because that's massively overused. And it's this idea, I don't know, the tickets are going on sale tomorrow for the Reading Festival. I didn't get any. I know quite a few people that did. I'm a little bit old to be going to the Reading Festival, I think. But, somebody might say, oh, God, I'm so anxious, I'm not going to get one. But the challenge with that is that it confuses what these conditions are and how they make people feel. Because what we then tend to do in these situations is apply what the words and the terminology means to us, to someone else's situation. We've got to get better understanding the behaviours that are linked to these conditions. So if you're someone that's experiencing it, you can find strategies to cope and manage it. And if you're an employer or a friend or a family trying to support it, you can be better placed to help it. And one of the things that we can all do is think about our language, think about the feelings that we are experiencing, and whether or not that is anxiety and depression, or whether that is in the moment how a situation is presenting for us and how it's making us feel. And I just kind of I thought this was really relevant in the world just now. But here's a really poor picture of a tennis player. Not sure if you know her, Naomi Osaka. It's a huge global story just now, and I just felt that it couldn't be more relevant. Here we've got the world number 2 tennis player unable to speak with the press post-competition, citing the protection of her mental health as the reason. And there are her governing body of tennis fining her something like $15,000 each per tournament, not sure, lots of money for not doing so. And they determined that it's an essential part of her tennis. And yet, in a recent press interview in America, Aside from the question about her game, were questions about her father, her relationship with him, what she'd had for dinner, if her mental health was better, etc., etc. I'm not wholly sure what the latter questions have got anything to do with her tennis, but I think it's particularly interesting that she stepped up to candidly say, I can't do this, and actually I can't do it because I have these conditions. This is more than a feeling, a sense of being unsettled. These are conditions that I am managing, that I am medicated, that I have access to support for. And yet, as a governing body, they decided that, you know, to have one of the most common conditions in the world dismissed, it just wasn't a good enough reason. And that is the state of the affairs just now. But let's not despair, because there are things that you can do, that we can do to look after ourselves. And kudos to her for actually making the decision that what she needed came above her game and her job. I'm sure that those that made the decision for her to not participate are sat in their boardrooms as we speak, engaged on courses about understanding anxiety and depression. When you think about your mental health, it's quite useful to consider it as a spectrum. It's a range that transitions in stages. Ultimately, we are at our best when we are healthy, this one over here. I've tried to underline it. There you go. That's my attempt at a bit of a squiggle. That's optimally where we want to be. But actually, sometimes things can be a bit tough, a bit meh, and we move to a coping phase, which is absolutely fine. And that's the second one on this spectrum. When we are in this stage, we are looking to adopt strategies to help ourselves. And, you know, whether it's a hobby or socializing or following a routine, having a plan, getting good sleep, exercising, eating well, whatever that might be, it means that we are keeping going, that we are coping with what is going on around us and for us as a result of the strategies that we've put into place. I guess if we then move to the struggling phase and these strategies aren't working, it should in essence ring a bell and for there to be some recognition that things are different and that the capacity you had to cope and manage in those situations that were a bit tough isn't there at the minute. It's not to say that it won't come back, it's just not there right now. And at that point, it's probably time to reach out and ask for help or more help if need be. What we can tend to do as a society, however, unfortunately, is wait. We wait, we sit in it, we feel it, we experience it without always applying coping strategies, without always reaching out, without using the techniques that could help us. We certainly don't talk about it. We don't do things differently to try and bring about change. That is often where we then end up unwell and in crisis. And at that point, we are working back to in recovery rather than using preventative or emerging strategies to make sure that we can keep things at bay. I must say that's not the case for all people, and some people move within that spectrum quite quickly without necessarily identifying with the middle two, and it's personal to everyone. But if we can think about it along that spectrum and recognize for ourselves when it's not working, we can often better manage what we do about it and how we go about affecting change for our own well-being. The number of apprentices that get on the phone to us and say, you know, Jill, this is happening for me. This is what I'm experiencing. And we say to that apprentice, you know, I'm sorry that that's the case. What does that look like for you? What have you done about that? And, you know, so often an apprentice will say, well, I haven't done anything. I haven't, you know, tried anything. And if we could kind of get those conversations happening sooner, if we can think about what we could do sooner, the idea is that we remain in this healthy equilibrium much, much more so than moving or transitioning to the unwell stage. I think, you know, this slide speaks for itself. I'm really sorry to use the pun of an MOT, but, you know, it couldn't be truer. These cars don't run themselves, do they? They have the very specialist skill set to care for them provided by you as the apprentices. So why we don't give ourselves the same level of love and care we give some of these motors is absolutely beyond me. Put yourselves at the same level of importance as you do these cars that you either own or look after. That has got to be a good place to start. We don't just, you know, run these vehicles and hope for the best. We actually put in place checks and measures to make sure that they run efficiently. So what are some of the signs and symptoms to look out for? Well, they're not exhaustive, but they include what I've written here: the lack of motivation, absence from work or persistent absence from work, being unable to concentrate, being bad-tempered. We all get a bit moody every now and again, but if you're finding yourself persistently in that state, it could be that something else is transpiring. Overwhelming emotions. I mean, I pretty much cry at everything. So for me, that isn't an indicator. But if I find myself being overwhelmed with how I feel all of the time, then that balance that we talked about earlier might be missing. And therefore, I might need to consider what else that could be about. Constantly feeling tired, prolonged increased heart rate, rapid heart rate. Look out for these changes. These are just some of the things that you might see or feel, but they're no means exhaustive. Think about what is different for you. How long have you felt that different? What does that look like? Have you been able to take small steps or make small changes to feel better? Or is it that you can't shake things off? There are always options. If you find yourself in the position of your mental health or well-being being compromised to the point that you cannot cope with it, there are things that you can do, and there are people that you can see. And my colleague from Ben will talk you through some of those shortly. But I've included some simple strategies in here with the support of my colleagues at the Charlie Waller Trust. I believe the presentation will be available to you after this, so you can look back at them in a bit more detail and think about how they might be relevant for you. But I just want to explore and leave with you some thinking about how you can manage your stress. And this is something that we call the stress container. It might be familiar to you, but think about your stress as water filling up a bucket. If we have nowhere to release the water, what do we end up with? It's not a trick question. I'm sure you're all thinking the same thing. And you can see from this diagram that actually the bucket potentially is going to overflow. If an overflowing bucket is going to get messy, it's going to cause a bit of a cleanup at best. But if we now think about that in terms of our stress, unless we find a release, an outlet, a tap, we're going to do, in principle, exactly the same thing, or it's going to do the same thing to us. It's going to overflow. It's going to become too much, and we're going to become overwhelmed by it, and it becomes unmanageable. What we need to try and think about is this idea that we use the helpful coping strategies, which is where the tap exits, lets the water out, rather than allowing unhelpful strategies but overwhelm us and mean that we don't, in essence, do what we need to do for ourselves. One thing you can do to support yourselves with that is to ensure that the tap exists on this container, which helps prevent this bucket from overflowing, exists for you too. And that's the bit we refer to as our coping strategies. In this case, it's a tap. It's one single thing that makes the difference. And it could be the same for you, or it could be that you need to rely on a number of things to affect that change for you. What you can try. These are some of the strategies that I have mentioned. This is the first one. It's called STOPP. It's about actually in that moment, rather than being reactive, rather than being impulsive, about taking the time to step back, breathe, observe the situation that's going on around you, practice what it is that works for you. Where anxiety and depression is prevalent, what we can tend to do is rely on avoidance, and actually, avoidance solved nothing anytime ever in the most part. So don't consider how you can withdraw from it, but actually how you can engage in it and manage it. If you think about your worries on a scale of 1 to 10, this looks quite simplified, but actually it's some of the simpler strategies that can have the biggest effect. Where are you at now? Where would you put yourself? What's happening to you that puts you at that number? Recognizing your triggers is key, because if we don't recognize them, they're likely to repeat and the pattern reemerges without you necessarily knowing or understanding what it was that was going wrong for you the first time. So familiarity with self is really important. What's the highest number you've ever been? Where would you put that? Where were you when that number was happening? Was it a good place? What were you doing? What do you remember about that? What sort of number would you like to move to right now? And what sort of things could help you get there? So in essence, you are strategizing and planning about how you can get yourself back to that particular number that meant that things were okay for you. Another thing is really simple, but those people that might have experienced a panic attack, always forget to do, and that's breathe in the moment. It's about regulating yourself again, because you've a panic attack is on its way, it's emerging, you're in a state of what feels like no return, but actually focusing on some breathing exercises, breathing in for 7 seconds, breathing out for 11 seconds, repeating these steps will actually bring you back down and interrupt that sense of panic, those feelings that you're experiencing. Just another one here that you can try. Really simple things. When you're under a car, when you're fixing, head in the engine and your mind's running away with you, these are things that you can try. You're breathing in, you're breathing out, repeating it over a period of time. Okay. And then, ultimately, you need to understand as apprentices that we are here for you. There is no problem that we can't tackle with you. There isn't anything that we don't want to hear about. We know it's a difficult industry. We know it's an industry that we are working to change, to move forward into 2021. And we want to do that with you. And they want to do that with you, actually. So don't feel that you are on your own and that you can't get support. There are some places that you can go to independently. I've tried to list them in here. This is in addition to Ben, and I don't want to take away from what Rachel's about to do with you, but also your mentors, your assessors, the safeguarding team, your trainers. Talk to any one of us, and we are here to help, and we would like to help. Over and out.